There's a lot going on this time of year at the Idaho State House. Committee meetings, bill proposals, and key debates that could shape Idaho's future. I'm James Dawson, state government reporter for Boise State Public Radio, and I spend my days from January to April sorting through the action at the legislature so you don't have to. Sign up for my weekly newsletter, Legislative Roundup, and you'll get each week's biggest news and developments from the session delivered straight to your inbox every Monday morning. Sign up for Legislative Roundup at our website, boisestatepublicradio.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Samantha Wright, filling in for Jim Gaudet. It's Idaho Matters. There are wastewater treatment plants in every major city. They're designed to filter out some of the chemicals and drugs that end up going down our drains. But there's another way this kind of treatment takes place, and it's all natural. Rivers have microorganisms, bacteria, that break down contaminants by basically eating them. And that's great for the rivers. But after the bacteria digests those nasty chemicals like nitrates, the bacteria can sometimes breathe out even worse stuff like greenhouse gases. Kevin Roach is the director of Hydraulic Interfaces and Processes Laboratory in the Department of Civil Engineering at Boise State University, and he's been studying all of this. Dr. Roach, thanks so much for being here. Tell us more about your research. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Samantha. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell me about these microorganisms and what they do. I understand they've been called the river's liver. How do they filter out bad things?
Yeah, there's a certain area where they really thrive in rivers. It's kind of surprising, but when we think about life in rivers, if you were to kind of scoop out all the fish and put them on a scale, and scoop out all of the plants and put them on a scale, and scoop out all the insects and put them on the scale, all of that added up would not amount close at all to the amount of bacteria and other microorganisms that live in the river. So these are these compounds that are kind of 1,000,000 times smaller than we are. And it just so happens that they like to live in these sediments just below the river bottom. And that area, because these organisms are living and breathing and eating, as you mentioned, they do a really good job of also eating contaminants or breathing in and breathing out contaminants in a way that naturally filters them out. And so that's why we call this the river's liver sometimes.
And I understand there's an I Love Lucy connection to this. How does that work?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That really kind of hits at what we like to do in my laboratory. So we're in an engineering department. We're an engineering laboratory. And one of the reasons for that is we try to bring together a lot of different concepts in order to be able to make predictions about how many of these contaminants might be getting filtered out. And so Samantha, there's a really popular Lucy episode. Correct me if I need to fill you in a little bit more, but are you familiar with the chocolate episode where they're working at the chocolate factory? Of course, this is one of the more famous ones, right? Where the line boss says, if any one of these chocolate makes it across the assembly line without you wrapping it, then we're gonna be in trouble, right? And of course chaos ensues, and they can't wrap the chocolates fast enough. And Lucy and Ethel end up stuffing them in their mouths and whatnot. And you can kind of think about what do we need in order to predict how many chocolates are going to make it out the other side. And you can think about the speed of that assembly line as how fast the water's moving, and the number of chocolates on that assembly line is, how much contamination or nutrients or something else might be in the river. And then the number of Lucys and Ethels that are on the assembly line is the number of bacteria. And then how fast they can either wrap or stuff those things in their mouth is really analogous to kind of how active those bacteria are. And we really need to understand all of those different pieces in order to say something predictive about how many chocolates are going to make it to the other side.
Wow. Okay. That is a beautiful analogy. I love that. Okay. So we've got the bacteria, the Lucys, they're eating stuff like nitrates. That's good because nitrates are bad for the water. But then you say that the bacteria can breathe out stuff that can sometimes also be bad, like like nitrous oxide. What is nitrous oxide? Why is that bad?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, these are fascinating creatures. I could wax poetic about them, all of the different ways that they interact and compete and cooperate with each other. But one kind of interesting one that's relevant for your question is how they breathe. So they're eating things they need to breathe, and normally they're breathing oxygen just like you and I,
Mhm.
or similar enough to you and I, and breathing out carbon dioxide. But they don't stop there. If the oxygen goes away, as it does in a lot of different parts of river sediments, they can switch over and start breathing in nitrate. And what they breathe out might change. It kind of varies on certain circumstances. And one of the things that they breathe out is nitrous oxide. So
Mm,
this is a gas, and once it bubbles up out of the river and into the atmosphere, it's actually a greenhouse gas that can be or is 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide.
wow.
So we care about this because there's evidence that rivers are emitting more of it than in the past, and we want to know why.
Wow. Okay, we're speaking with Dr. Kevin Roach. He's the director of hydraulic. Oh man, that's tough. Hydraulic. Help me out.
The hydrologic
Thank
interfaces
you.
and processes
Oh,
lab.
that is must be crazy on a card. It's in the Department of Civil Engineering at Boise State University. We're talking about his research. So, along with this, you're doing a lot of different studies, actually. Along with nitrates, you're also studying things like drugs, pharmaceuticals that end up in the river, and what happens to those. So, first, how do pharmaceuticals get into the river? How does that happen?
Yeah, there's a few different ways, but the one that I'll focus on is that these are even if we did everything by the book. So if we consumed a drug that was prescribed to us, not all of that drug would make its way or would get completely transformed within our bodies. So these are compounds that are designed to degrade slowly. And that means that even if some of it passes its way out of our bodies, it's going to make its way to a wastewater treatment facility. And those facilities do a pretty good job, but in some circumstances, they might not be able to degrade all of these compounds either. And so a little bit of it might make its way into a river. And this is important because really, really small quantities of pharmaceuticals have been shown to adversely impact aquatic communities. And so we need to learn more about these, I guess, those concentrations as well as what happens to the compounds when they make their way into the river.
And let's talk about that. The bacteria we've been talking about can also eat those drugs, but then they breathe out again something called daughter products. What are those? And why can they be worse than the original drug that's in the river?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, these compounds are very large and they contain, components of them that might be considered food. So the bacteria are kind of picking at them, and those compounds might degrade a little bit, but there's still kind of the bulk of the main thing there, and that's what I'm calling the daughter product.
Mm.
And so, even though pharmaceuticals are degrading, they might be degrading in such a way that they get transformed into other things, and that daughter product might actually be more toxic to
Oh,
these just because of the way they've been transformed. They might be, passing their way through an organism in a way that presents a greater toxicity risk. And really want to understand kind of why and where and how much of this is actually happening in our rivers.
so let's talk about the research and the why and the how, especially like in rivers like Idaho. It looks like one of the things you're doing is trying to figure out where are the best places for scientists to monitor rivers for this sort of thing. Is that because we can't monitor everything, every mile of every river?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Samantha. The amounts of these substances is so small. So we're talking, one analogy is if you drop just a few pills of some of these drugs into an Olympic-sized swimming pool, that would be a high enough concentration to matter in
Mm.
terms of toxicity risk for some organisms, be they insects or fish. So we're talking really low concentrations that can impact these organisms by changing their behaviors, by altering their reproductive capabilities or halting their reproductive capabilities. And we cannot monitor them everywhere just because they're really, really low in concentration, and it's just really expensive to measure them. And so what we want to do in our work is perform laboratory experiments, or what we're currently doing is performing laboratory experiments and building mathematical models so that we can fill in the gaps. We can kind of, knowing some of those levers that we were talking about, the assembly line and the number of Lucy's, things that we can actually measure, where might the exposure problems be? Where might fish actually be at risk, so that when we do go out into rivers and try to monitor what's happening, we can go to the right spots.
We've got a couple minutes left, and you've got a couple of ways people can help if they're not super scientists like yourself. The first one is when you're fertilizing your lawn. How can we fertilize without, say, hurting a river? What's the best time to do that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times the nitrates, those are usually what we focus on as in terms of a pollutant that's associated with fertilizers, and they're very mobile. So if we put them on our lawns, or if you fertilize our lawns right before a rainstorm, a lot of that's just going to get washed right into a river or into our groundwater. So we don't want to be doing any fertilizing right before we're expecting a rain event to happen. And then in terms of the pharmaceuticals, I think one of the main things to note is that there are pharmaceutical take-back programs that are hosted by the city, by the sheriff's office, and even certain pharmacies around the city. And this is the best way of disposing pharmaceutical compounds, so that they don't go down a toilet or into a trash in a landfill, where they can make their way into groundwater or actually get consumed in some way by life.
Don't flush your leftover drugs down the toilet. Not a good idea.
Exactly.
Oh, this has been fascinating. I want to thank you so much for sharing some of your research with us. This is very exciting.
Thank you, Samantha. I really appreciate all you guys, what you do at Idaho Matters, and helping us connect with one another and learn from one another in the local community.
Well, thank you. We've been speaking with Dr. Kevin Roach. He's the director of Hydrologic Interfaces and Processes Laboratory in the Department of Civil Engineering at Boise State University. We've been talking about his research. We'll put some links online at boisestatepublicradio.org.
And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.